And now we talk about education, the purpose of education, and so forth at this point. Education at this point in time is a relatively recent concept. And in 1870, for example, only 2% of Americans graduated from high school. But by 1900, 31 states had compulsory education laws. So in a 30-year span, we basically go from 0 to 60, if you will. We go from nobody gets educated to everybody should get educated. Teach literacy, teach working skills. That's honestly part of it. We'll get to this in a minute, but part of the big reason for the push is we need workers, and we need workers who at least have some education. But there's more to it than just that. Take, for example, assimilation. Part of the idea here is that the purpose of education is to teach immigrants what it means to be an American. So the idea here is we're going to use schools to teach you our values, our language, our culture. Sometimes this was a good thing, and sometimes it was not such a good thing. Take, for example, Richard Henry Pratt in the Carlisle Indian School. Richard Henry Pratt was a missionary, for lack of a better word, who went out into Indian reservations and created schools like the Carlisle Indian School to teach the Indians skills, language, and so forth. So far, so good. But what you got to understand is that there's also a really, really, really heavy racist element here. Because as he talked about, the school's mission was to kill the Indian and save the man, convert the Indian from their ways to our ways, including religion. So what we're trying to do is we're taking all these immigrants, all these Native Americans, all these former slaves, and we're going to break them of their culture and instead give them our culture, the white man's culture. Which again, that's kind of racist. There's no other real way to describe it. But again, it's what they thought was the way to do it. So we're using education again as a way to try to solve that. That being said, education is still heavily segregated, with a lot of uneven support. There are white schools, there are black schools, there are immigrant schools. As you might guess, the white schools were the better off ones, the black schools not so much, and the immigrant schools, God help you. So there's a lot of segregation, a lot of uneven support for this. To make up the gaps, you turn to philanthropy. Philanthropy is when a rich gentleman or woman, although at this period of time, let's be honest, it's a gentleman, would give money to someplace in order to make it better. In exchange, they get to get their name on it. Hence, Vanderbilt University, Duke University. A lot of private colleges were created through philanthropy. The idea is that they make their own name sound better, and you get a school. Sometimes, again, this was done out of the goodness of their heart. Sometimes it was just done out of wanting to put their name on stuff. That was Cornelius Vanderbilt. Also, Randolph Duke. Again, I forget the original name of Duke University, but Duke was a tobacco baron and basically just said, here's a sack of money with a dollar sign on it. Ding! And now when you think the name Duke, you don't think lung cancer. You think university with a basketball team, or a basketball team with a university, depending upon your perspective. Not the point. So, again, philanthropy was oftentimes a way to make up the gap. But, unfortunately, the philanthropists oftentimes tended to lean on the side of what they viewed as important, which was white men. So the white men got a lot of the money from the white men philanthropists. Sigh. Okay, there's a new educational movement during this period also called pragmatism. Pragmatism, espoused by a man named William James. Pragmatism was a philosophy that says that logic and science can solve everything. So we should study science, we should study education and so forth, or study logic and science and so forth in order to produce better outcomes, if you will, is the best way to put it, I guess. So rather than putting our faith in religion or putting our faith in technology, let's put our faith in science and logic to create a better life for us. The last thing under this section, again under the idea of race, is that there was an idea about how education could and should affect people of different races. There's a big disagreement here in the African American community. Take, for example, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington believed in the idea of education as a form of economic security. He did not believe in education for things like, Latin, Greek, esoteric reasons. Like, there's no reason to study philosophy. Instead, education is a tool to pull yourself up from economic poverty. Booker T. Washington argued that the reason why white Americans were controlling black Americans' rights was because they were afraid of them. They thought that black Americans were going to take their jobs and take their wives and again, take all their land and so forth. So instead, African Americans should simply build themselves up through education and through hard work to prove that they're not a threat. We don't want to take, white people's, land. We want to get land of our own. That's what he argued. To further this, he creates the Tuskegee Institute, which was basically one of the first African American colleges. The idea being, again, that you're going to learn practical skills to build yourself up and so forth. On the other hand, W.E.B. Du Bois argued that, created the Niagara movement. And he argued that if he wants to learn anything, he should be allowed to learn it. That what's the point of building yourself up academically if the white man's just going to take it away with trumped up laws, with fake laws and so forth? And so those who followed the Niagara movement at W.B. Du Bois placed more emphasis on education regarding things that, A, you wanted to learn, whatever it might be. So if you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, by God, you should go do it. You shouldn't only learn about like how to build a house and how to, raise a field, but also you should become educated about your rights. How can you use the law? How can you fight back against racism? How can you make sure that your life is whatever you want it to be? So there's a bit of a disagreement about the role of education in African Americans' lives, but those are the two major discussions. Now, when we come back, we'll be doing Roman numeral 8, talking about entertainment, which is, well, entertaining. So, bye!